A racist cop torched Big Shaq's $10 million farmhouse, thinking the flames would bury the truth. But that fire didn't just burn wood. It woke a sleeping giant. What followed wasn't just unexpected. It was a storm no one saw coming, because some homes hold more than walls. They hold revolutions. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Georgia's sun doesn't just shine. It settles, slow and golden, across the earth, like a soft promise. On the edge of that light, nestled between tall pines and fields that smell like July rain, sat a place the locals called Shaq's Grove, not because it was listed that way on any map, but because that's what it had become, a space that belonged to Big Shaq, but really to everyone. The farmhouse stood quiet but proud, a $10 million estate wrapped in humility. No gates, no neon security, just a white rocking chair on a long front porch, always in motion, like the heartbeat of the land. Children came and went freely. Parents waved from dusty pickup trucks. Dogs barked playfully at the fence line. And birds somehow always found the rhythm to Lucille's humming as she sang old gospel verses from the 70s. Her voice was soft, steady, never too loud, never too polished, but deeply felt. It echoed off the porch beams, poured over the garden rows, and settled like scripture in the breeze. Big Shaq folks called him that, with love, moved like the land listened to him. Broad, grounded, deliberate. He didn't command attention, he invited it. Whether he was flipping ribs at a Sunday barbecue, or coaching Little League kids through their fears of striking out, he gave people something more than advice. He gave them his time, his full presence, a rare thing in a world too loud to be still. Shaq's money was legendary, sure. Everybody knew the numbers. But around here his wealth didn't glitter. It grew. He funded school lunches with no announcements, quietly paid off mortgages for elderly neighbors behind on payments, built a clinic that never turned away an uninsured family, planted rows of fruit trees where there used to be cracked concrete. Each act of giving was planted like a seed, and in time the whole town began to breathe better, breathe free. On Saturdays, the backyard buzzed with joy. Folks danced to old vinyl. You'd find Manera chalking messages on the pavement. Be kind, be fierce. Her teenage boldness wrapped in the warmth of someone raised in love, not fear. Shawnee tended to the lemonade stand at the front gate, laughing that even millionaires needed to stay humble. Neighbors lined up for miles, some just to talk, some just to feel what the place gave off. Peace. Authentic, untouchable peace. Inside the house, the walls weren't whitewashed with wealth. They held photos, stories, fingerprints. Lucille kept a Bible near the stove. Not for show, but because she read from it every morning. She believed every verse had a time to speak. That week she had underlined one that stuck with her. The fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. She didn't know why, but it lingered. There were no divisions here. Black, white, rich, poor. Shaq didn't entertain those divides. He welcomed those who needed a seat at the table, even if they didn't know how to ask. His voice was soft, deep, and full of empathy. He'd say, "You don't measure a man by what he owns, you measure him by what he restores." At night the property glowed. Solar lights lit a path from the back barn to the porch steps. There was never silence, only stillness. Peaceful stillness. Even the insects moved like they respected the calm. When storms came, and they sometimes did, the house would creak but stand tall. The old oak in the center yard had survived 5 hurricanes. Shaq used to joke that the tree was older than Lucille, but she'd swat his arm and smile. That tree ain't raised 3 generations, though. He kept things simple. No staff buzzed around, no security team in headsets, just trust, community, and that feeling you get when home isn't a place, it's a presence. Even strangers noticed it. Delivery drivers said the energy shifted when they turned off the main road. You could feel the difference, even if you couldn't name it. On Tuesday mornings, Shaq met with a group of local teens under the shade of the barn overhang. No sermons, just talks. He'd let them speak, listen, remind them that anger without direction was fire without purpose. "I've been tall my whole life," he told them once, "but it took me years to stand tall." They held on to those words like lifelines. But on this particular morning, as the Georgia heat came in early and thick, something felt different. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, it was in the wind, slightly faster, in the birds quieter than usual, in Lucille's humming, a half note off. Shaq stepped onto the porch and paused. The sun was rising, but the horizon didn't greet it. There was a tension in the light. He scanned the property, eyes slow, intentional. Everything looked the same, but something didn't feel the same. Mira was still asleep. Shawnee was making her morning smoothie. Lucille flipped through her dog-eared Psalms. Still, Shaq's chest held a weight he couldn't name. He looked out toward the edge of the field where the grass met the gravel road, where the mailbox leaned slightly forward like it was trying to whisper something. He looked longer than usual, eyes narrowing, trying to understand the silence that wasn't peaceful. Just pause. But then Miara's voice broke through the quiet. "Dad, can we do s'mores tonight?" Shaq smiled. "Yeah, baby girl. We'll build a good fire." He didn't know those words would echo. He didn't know the next fire wouldn't be theirs. He didn't know the grove was breathing its last peaceful breath. The land had known peace. The kind that heals. The kind that roots you. But peace in a world still tangled in injustice doesn't go unchallenged. It is always, somehow, a threat to the systems built on fear. And peace, when it burns, doesn't scream. It whispers. First, because the storm was already on its way. Hidden behind a badge, carried by a man with a lighter in one hand, and history's old hate in the other. But for now, the land still breathed. And Shaq stood tall. Summer in Georgia has a way of stretching out time. Days feel longer, like the sky is trying to hold on to something before it fades. But in the weeks after Shaq's peaceful morning on the porch, time began to feel tighter, like it was bracing for something unseen. The air shifted, not colder, just more alert, more watchful. People still smiled, but something behind their eyes started to flicker, like they were waiting for news they didn't want to hear. That's when Deputy Colt Wexler showed up.
New boots. New badge. Same old stink of something rotten, hidden under politeness.
He drove a slick black cruiser, windows tinted too dark for a small-town welcome. Wexler introduced himself with a firm handshake, and that kind of over-politeness that Southern folks recognize as a mask. His smile was all teeth, no warmth. The sheriff, Harland Greaves, called it fresh blood for the force, with some locals whispered otherwise. They said Wexler came from a department upstate, left quick, no fanfare, no farewell, just gone. People don't usually transfer like that, unless something went wrong. Shaq gave him the benefit of the doubt, because that's how he lived. Don't judge a man by his shadow. Lucille always said, judge him by where he stands in the light. But light has a way of showing everything in time. At first it was subtle. A parking citation appeared on Shaq's truck. Something about an obstructed view, even though it had been parked in the same spot for 5 years. Then came the zoning visit. A clipboard-wielding inspector said the barn's side door opened too close to a public easement. Next week, it was a fine for unauthorized signage, Mura's chalk art on the driveway, labeled as graffiti. Shaq didn't flinch. He handled every notice with calm hands. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. He told Mira, when they see peace, they'll test it. Don't answer hate with hate. You answer with steadiness. But still, Wexler came around. Too often. Always circling. Not asking questions. Just watching. Parked across the road some nights, pretending to be running radar. He'd wave that same flat-palmed wave when Shaq walked out. But his eyes were different. Hollow, like someone reading from a script they never believed in. Wexler wasn't policing. He was probing, looking for cracks, for reasons, for ways to fold power back into the hands of people who never wanted to share it in the first place. People in town noticed the shift. A few quiet conversations popped up at the barbershop and post office. Folks didn't say Wexler's name, but they said things like, feels like the past is trying to rise up again. Or didn't we already fight this fight back in the 60s? But no one did more than talk. They were afraid to accuse a badge without proof. That fear wasn't new. It was just older than most folks admitted. One morning, Shawnee found their mailbox smashed in, post twisted like paper. A dead crow was lying just beneath it. No note, no signature, just a message sent in silence. Shaq didn't flinch. He cleaned it up, replaced the post, and kissed Myra on the forehead before school like always. But that night, he stood longer than usual by the window, watching, waiting. And then came the smoke. It was a Sunday. The air smelled like sun-baked cedar and freshly cut grass. Shaq had just helped Lucille back into the house after church. Mira was picking flowers to press into her journal. Shawnee was laughing on the porch, sipping sweet tea, her feet swinging off the edge. The mood was light, soaked in familiarity. Then a neighbor's voice cracked through the air. "Smoke! Shaq! Your barn!" Everyone turned. Over the ridge, just past the pecan grove, black smoke tore upward in a twisting column. Not gray, not blue, black. Thick, fat. Shaq didn't run, he moved. Solid, certain, like a man used to dealing with pressure. But when he reached the barn, it was too late. The flames had caught fast and high. The dry summer made kindling of every old board. The windows popped in rhythmic bursts. Shaq tried to unhook the hose, but the fire licked up the siding like it already knew the way. There were no animals inside, no people hurt, but everything else. Tools, records, old photographs, his father's toolbox, gone in the span of minutes. Firefighters arrived within 10. Sirens pierced the quiet, but they couldn't catch up to what had already taken hold. They did what they could. They kept it from spreading to the house, but the barn collapsed in on itself, a memory folding inward like the closing of a chapter no one meant to write. Wexler arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't get out of the car at first, just sat in the cruiser, watching the last beams fall. Then he stepped out, leaned against the hood, and said too casually, "Damn shame." Shaq didn't answer. He didn't even look at him. The fire chief ruled it undetermined cause, said it might have been electrical, though the barn had no active wiring. Said maybe something in the hay spontaneously combusted, though the hay hadn't been stored for weeks. Lucille didn't buy it. Neither did Shawnee. Mira cried in the kitchen. Her drawings curled and blackened from the heat that had licked through the window panes. Shaq just sat on the porch swing that night. Didn't speak, didn't blink much, just rocked slowly. Neighbors came by, brought food, hugs, promises. One left a note that said, "We see you, we stand with you." It helped. A little, but not enough. The worst part wasn't the loss of the barn. It wasn't even the things burned inside. It was the feeling that someone did this on purpose, that the smoke wasn't just a consequence. It was a message, a warning, a claim, but no one saw anything. No witnesses, no cameras, no justice. Just the smell of ash in the wind, and the echo of a fire that didn't belong. And from across the road, under the cover of his cruiser, Wexler watched the smoke curl into the Georgia sky like a signature he thought no one would ever trace. But the land remembered. And so did Shaq. The morning after the fire didn't begin with birdsong. The usual rhythm of Georgia's warm breath was replaced by a stillness so heavy it seemed to hold the air hostage. Ash settled over the grass like quiet judgment. The barn that once stood tall, full of memories, was now a sunken frame of black ribs clawing at the sky. Shaq stood barefoot in the ruins, his size 22 soles pressing into the soot-stained soil. He didn't flinch at the cinders or the hot shards scattered beneath his feet. Pain wasn't the point now, presence was. He moved without speaking, shoulders hunched against nothing but the echo of what used to be. The old swing that had hung from the back corner beam was gone. The ladder Mara used to climb for rooftop stargazing was twisted metal now. The scent of smoke still clawed at everything. His skin, his clothes, his lungs. But beneath that there was something sharper. The smell of gasoline. Raw, intentional, unmistakable. Lucille sat on the porch steps behind him, her church dress wrinkled from sleep and sorrow. In her hands she held a frame, charred at the edges, glass cracked. Inside was a photograph of Shaq's father holding him at 10 years old. In front of that very barn, the colors had blurred under heat, but the outline of the embrace remained, like a ghost refusing to be erased. Her fingers moved over the picture slowly, rhythmically, as though trying to reweave time. Inside the house, Miara sat at the dining table, eyes locked on a blank journal page. Her pencil hadn't moved in hours. The voice in her mind, however, had her own voice. Steady, repeating, "We don't run from grief. We walk through it." It was something her father had once whispered to her at her first funeral, when their neighbor Mr. Tully passed. Now the words looped in her thoughts, looping with purpose, not to comfort, to prepare. The fire chief had come and gone. He'd left a clipboard full of phrases like spontaneous combustion, possible structural failure, an open case. But Shaq had seen what they hadn't. A line of charring along the base of the west wall, not from the top down, but from the ground up. It was too straight, too clean, too methodical. Someone had walked that barn with purpose. Someone had wanted to erase him. But why now? And why him? Shaq didn't need pity. He didn't want it. What he wanted was understanding. And not just for himself, for every man who'd stood on solid ground, only to feel it pulled from beneath them, for every legacy that had been quietly threatened in the dark. The fire wasn't just an act of hate. It was a message sent through flames. And yet, Shaq refused to speak the words others expected of him. He would not accuse blindly. He would not shout into the wind. He'd seen too many rushed judgments wrought under scrutiny. What he needed was truth, pure, undeniable, and full of weight. Local media arrived by mid-morning, crawling through the char like flies on sweetness. They didn't bring compassion, only narratives. One reporter asked Shaq, "Do you believe this was an accident, sir?" The mic hovered. Shaq didn't flinch. "I believe in patterns," he said quietly, "and I know when something don't fit." By noon, a small crowd had gathered on the property's edge. Some came with food, others with quiet prayers. Shaq greeted every face, but his mind stayed behind his eyes, locked on the burn pattern, the smell of fuel and the timing. Wexler hadn't shown his face since the day before. That was a flag all its own. Later that day, Shaq walked the perimeter again, this time with his friend Boone Carter, a retired fire marshal, and someone he trusted beyond words. Boone crouched low by the foundation, ran 2 fingers along a faint trail. Then he looked up, eyes narrowed. "This was walked," Boone said. "Not spilled. Someone dragged a line, clean as a fuse. This wasn't no lightning bolt." That changed everything. Shaq leaned against the barn's remaining stone pillar. His jaw tightened, but not with rage, with resolve. He would not let this story fade into local rumors. He would not let it dissolve under half-truths and bureaucracy. Not now, not when someone meant for it to break him. Back inside, Lucille finally stood. She walked the photo frame to the kitchen sink and rinsed the soot from the glass as best she could. The water ran dark for a minute, but the image beneath stayed, still smudged, still wounded, but still there. At sunset, Shaq sat with Myra in the yard, the scorched earth behind them. She rested her head on his shoulder. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "Do you think it was him? The cop?" Shaq didn't answer right away. He let the breeze move around them. Let the crickets begin their nightly song. Then he said, "I don't think, I know someone did this. But truth don't come when you chase it. Angry, it comes when you stand still and listen." Myra nodded. Her voice whispered one more time. "We don't run from grief, we walk through it." That night, the farmhouse lights stayed on, later than usual. Shaq stayed up reading, not out of insomnia, out of calculation. He read court transcripts, reports of old fires. A pattern began to form, not just in his gut, but on the page. Meanwhile, Lucille placed the salvaged photo back on the mantel, not to forget the fire, but to mark it. To remember what tried to break them. To remind them what they still carried. Shaq didn't tell the press what Boone had found. Not yet. He knew the moment he spoke it, the machine would spin. Accusations, defenses, discrediting. He needed more than evidence. He needed irrefutable proof. So he waited, watched, listened. Because fires don't start themselves in patterns. And echoes, the kind that follow you, the kind that haunt the night. They don't lie. They just linger, waiting for the right ear. And Shaq's ears were open. 3 days after the fire, Sheriff Harlan Greaves held a press briefing on the courthouse lawn. The podium was borrowed from the high school auditorium, its wood faded and chipped. Greaves stepped up, face taut beneath his silver mustache, his beige uniform crisp but the brim of his hat worn from years of nodding through small-town politics. The air was thick, not from weather but from the weight of people wanting answers. "We've completed our investigation into the fire at the O'Neill property," he began, voice dry as old lumber. "There is at this time no conclusive evidence to support a criminal act. We believe the cause was accidental." Just like that, it was over. Closed. Filed. Gone. Shaq stood at the edge of the crowd. Arms crossed. Face unreadable. He didn't blink. Didn't shift. Didn't break his stillness. But something behind his eyes hardened. He had known Harlan a long time, back when he was just H, and wore boots too big for his frame. They'd coached Little League together, shared stories under Friday night lights. But something about Harlan's tone today felt different, like it wasn't him talking, like the man behind the podium had been replaced by a shadow of the one who used to laugh at Miara's lemonade stand. The press scattered fast. chasing other leads or heading back to Atlanta. But Shaq didn't move. He waited until the lawn cleared, then walked up slow, steady. "You really think it was just bad wiring?" he asked, voice calm but lined with quiet steel. Harlan hesitated. "Shaq, sometimes bad things happen, and there ain't always someone to hang it on." "There's always someone," Shaq replied. "Question is, who you willing to see?" Harlan sighed. "We ran it clean. My boys did the sweep. No accelerants, no suspects, no cause. I know it ain't what you want to hear, but I ain't got anything more to give you." But Shaq had seen the burn pattern. Boone had confirmed it. A trail. Intentional. Someone had torched that barn with full purpose. And Shaq already had his suspicion. He just didn't have the proof. Since the fire, Wexler had gone quieter, not absent, just more calculated. He was still on patrol, still cruising past Shaq's property, still offering that empty nod. But now, he didn't linger, didn't poke, almost like he was waiting, or listening. Shaq started rebuilding, slowly. Not just wood and frame, but life. He cleared the site himself, hands blackened with ash by dusk each day. Lucille packed lunches in silence. Milara offered help, then sat beside him in the dirt, not saying a word. Shawnee handled logistics, insurance, permits, contractors, all while keeping the kitchen running like nothing had cracked. But everyone felt the crack, and they all knew who might have swung the hammer. Still, Shaq didn't accuse. He asked. He began talking to folks, not loudly, not publicly, just small conversations in quiet corners. He asked his old friend Leroy, who worked over at the county record office, about Wexler's transfer. Official reason, Leroy said, flipping through a file. Just a departmental restructure, nothing serious on paper. But when Shaq pressed further, Leroy shrugged. Uneasy. Word is, he left Montgomery fast. Nobody threw him a party, if you catch my drift. Next up, Angela Crane, a part-time dispatcher who remembered voices better than birthdays. Shaq asked about Wexler's past calls, his beats, his record. Angela hesitated. He don't talk much. Real polite on the surface. But there's this edge, like he's waiting for somebody to step wrong. When Shaq mentioned the fire, she stiffened. I'll tell you this, big man. Before that night, Wexler requested an overtime patrol through your zone. Midnight to 4. That's logged. But in the final report, he marked himself at a school zone 2 counties over during the fire. An alibi. Airtight on paper, but hollow in truth. Shaq took that lead and turned to Ernie Delgado, a former beat cop from Montgomery who now worked private security. Over lunch in a side booth at Clover's Diner, Ernie leaned in. I remember Wexler, he said. He was quiet but cold, got into something. Internal review. Off the books. They said he mishandled an incident. No charges, but there was a settlement. Confidential. After that, he was encouraged to relocate. That's cop speak for we don't want the PR mess. Yeah. But what kind of incident? Shaq asked. Ernie looked away. Rumor was, racially charged traffic stop. Man ended up in the hospital. Dashcam footage disappeared. Wexler walked. Department swallowed it. Now it was clear. Wexler didn't just land in this town. He was moved. A puzzle piece no one wanted. Shoved into a quiet space where no one asked too many questions. And Harland, his old friend, had either ignored it or buried it. Back at the house, Shaq laid everything out on the dining table. The burned barn photo, Boone's assessment, Angela's dispatch log, Ernie's confession. Not enough to convict, but more than enough to see the pattern. Still without hard evidence, physical, forensic, undeniable. Shaq couldn't go public. Not yet. That night, Shaq stood in front of the scorched foundation again. The stars were out, but the land felt hollow. Not broken, just waiting. He thought about trust. About what it cost to give it. About what it means to watch it rot. Harland might have once been a friend, but now he was standing in the shadow of silence, too afraid to speak truth to his own system. Inside, Lucille prayed aloud, her voice steady, not pleading, just stating what needed to be heard. Mira lit a candle beside the window, a silent reminder, light still has a place, even in ash. And Shaq? He didn't speak that night. Didn't write. Didn't move much. But he wasn't done. Not even close. The night came quietly, its stillness hanging heavy over the scorched earth, like a paused breath. George's summer heat had softened into a cooler dusk, but Shaq couldn't sleep. Not out of restlessness, but because something about that barn, its silence, its ruin, refused to let him look away. Questions throbbed behind his temples. A fire that deliberate didn't just happen. Somebody knew what they were doing. Somebody made sure it burned clean and fast. And somebody saw. He just didn't know who until the whispers began. It was just after 10 p.m. when Lucille knocked gently on the doorframe of his study. "There's someone at the back fence," she said. "Not afraid. Just curious." Been standing there for half an hour. Ain't moved. Shaq stood, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out onto the back porch. Past the pecan grove, just beyond the edge of where the security lights reached, stood a shape, slight, slouched, familiar.
Reggie Four-Tooth Darnell.
A drifter by town standards. A watcher by nature. He'd lived in a patched-up canvas tent just outside Shaq's property line for years, never bothering anyone, never asking for anything, but always aware. Folks called him Four-Tooth not out of cruelty, but because Reggie didn't mind. He wore the name like an old shirt, loose, worn. Shaq walked toward him, calm, flashlight aimed low. "Even in, Reggie," he said softly. Reggie nodded, scratching his beard, eyes flitting between the barn's black skeleton and Shaq's face. "Even in, big man?" Shaq stopped a few feet away, not pressing, just waiting. Reggie looked around like the trees might be wired, like the soil might eavesdrop. "I saw something," he whispered, voice rough and cautious. "Other night, the fire night." Shaq didn't breathe, didn't blink, just nodded for him to go on. Reggie rubbed his hands together, nervous. "Didn't want no trouble. Didn't say nothing before 'cause I know what happens when folks like me start talking. But I saw it." "Saw what, Reggie?" Reggie leaned in, like the words themselves might bite. "A cop car. Marked. Parked right by the barn. I was coming back from the river trail. Got turned around in the dark. Ended up near the grove. Heard an engine humming. Saw the lights. Those little blue ones that stay on even when they ain't flashing. Sat there for maybe 10 minutes. Then it just drove off real slow." Shaq's heart pounded, but his voice stayed steady. "What time?" Reggie didn't hesitate. 3:17. I looked at my watch 'cause I thought maybe I was trespassing. 3:17. Right before the sky started turning. 3 hours before the fire. Before the blaze had claimed the barn. Before the sirens. Before the sheriff's silence. "You see the driver?" Shaq asked. Reggie shook his head. "Too dark. But I know a cruiser when I see one. And I know when a man's sitting inside. Just waiting. That wasn't no patrol stop, big man. That was someone setting the board." Shaq stood still. Not frozen. Not panicked. Focused. The pieces that had been scattered were starting to connect. Angela's dispatch logs. Boone's fuel trail. Ernie's rumors. And now Reggie's eyes. It wasn't a maybe anymore. It was a man in uniform. A fire lit not by accident, but by intention. Reggie shifted, the night wind rustling his coat. "I don't trust cops," he muttered, "but I trust you. Don't let them twist me up in this." "You're safe," Shaq said. And he meant it. "You did the right thing." Shaq walked him back to his camp, tucked away behind a patch of honeysuckle, left him with a cooler and a promise. Then he returned to the house and sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. By mid-morning he was standing in Sheriff Greaves' office, a folder in his hand and a storm behind his eyes. Erland looked up from his desk, expression tired. "Shaq, we need to talk," Shaq said, setting the folder down. Inside the timeline. Boone's diagram. Angela's log. Reggie's handwritten statement. No accusations, just evidence, patterns, dates, witnesses. Greaves flipped through it slowly, face tightening with each page. When he reached the last sheet, he set the folder aside, folded his hands and let out a long breath. "You're playing with fire," he said quietly. Shaq's brow rose. "Seems like that fire already found me." Greaves stood, walked to the window, looked out like answers might be growing in the courthouse lawn. Then, after a moment, "Wexler's not your average deputy. He's protected. Came down here under a favor. Political. That mean he's above the law?" "It means," Greaves said, turning slowly, "if you push this, things get ugly. Real ugly. Not just for you. For your family. For people like Reggie. These folks protect their own. They close ranks fast." Shaq stared at him. "You're telling me to drop it? I'm telling you to think about what matters most." Shaq stood, tall and unmoving. What matters most is truth, even if it burns. Greaves nodded once, slowly, like a man who already knew how this was going to play out. Then you better brace yourself. 'Cause if you go down this road, there's no coming back. Shaq didn't flinch. He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and walked out without another word. He wasn't looking for confrontation. He was looking for accountability. For every man who had lost something under cover of silence. For every voice buried beneath procedure. Outside, the sun was climbing high again, throwing long shadows across the ground. But Shaq didn't look at the shadows. He looked toward the fields, toward Reggie's tent, toward the grove. The truth had whispered. And now, he was ready to speak back. The morning the letters arrived, the light outside was soft and forgiving, as if the sky didn't yet know what the mail slot held. Shawnee was making tea in the kitchen, humming under her breath, while Nora braided her own hair at the dining table, flipping through an old scrapbook of the barn days. Lucille was reading her scripture by the window, whispering to herself, letting the verses fold into her bones like armor. It was a typical morning, the kind that tried to pretend the world was still kind. Then came the metallic clink. A drop of mail through the front door. Shawnee walked over with no urgency, expecting flyers, bills, some overdue catalog. But inside the stack was a small unmarked envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just her name, handwritten in jagged, all-caps script. She opened it cautiously. Inside, one single sheet of paper. Typed. No signature. Stay quiet. The fire was mercy. Next time it won't be. Shawnee didn't scream. She didn't shout for help. She just stood there, lips pressed tight, the letter trembling in her fingers. A moment later she opened the door and looked around. No car. No figure walking away. Just the street. Calm. Untouched. Line. By noon, 2 more letters had come. Tucked into the mailbox this time. Both typed. Both unsigned. One called Shaq a stain that never washed out. The other warned that traitors wearing a badge were still loyal, just to the right cause. Shaq sat at the table in silence, reading them twice. Minara sat beside him, fists clenched. Lucille stood behind him, with her hand on his shoulder. But it was Shawnee who broke the tension. I want this fingerprinted, she said flatly. One of them's got a smudge. Bottom corner. Shaq nodded. He didn't take it to the sheriff. He didn't even breathe a word to anyone local. Instead, that night he drove out to Atlanta, under the cover of darkness. Not to hide, but to protect the truth before it could be reshaped. His destination was a brownstone, nestled between old brick apartment blocks, and a corner bodega, with the best gumbo this side of Mississippi. 3rd floor, back office. Devin Creed, former state forensic analyst, retired early after blowing the whistle on a corruption ring buried in a task force report. Since then he worked off the books, quietly, precisely, with zero tolerance for lies. Devin opened the door in sweatpants and a worn Tulsa Truthers hoodie. His eyes flickered when he saw the envelope. You brought work, he said. You don't usually bring work. Shaq handed him the envelope. It ain't just work, Dev. It's something under the floorboards. Devin took the paper gently, careful not to smudge the edges. He moved like a surgeon. Slow, deliberate, efficient. He laid it flat on his light table, snapped on his gloves, and pulled out the tools of his exile. Partial, lower right. Shaq guided. Devin leaned in, adjusted the scope, and let silence settle around them. Minutes passed, filled only with the soft clicks of calibration, then a low whistle. Well, Devin said, tapping the screen. They were sloppy. You've got about 40% of a usable fingerprint here, not enough for a courtroom, but plenty for a match check. Shaq exhaled slowly. Run it. Devin opened a secured laptop, powered up his custom-built archive of prints, state, federal internal investigations, even a few leaked files from old Justice Department dumps. Within minutes, the scanner pinged. Devin stared at the screen longer than usual. What? Shaq asked, voice tight. Devin tapped the key twice. It's a match. To who?
Devin hesitated.
Dev. Shaq pressed. Talk to me. Devin turned the screen toward him. Colt Wexler. Print ID, right index finger. Not in any public arrest record. Not from any civilian investigation. But listed instead in an internal affairs folder marked Level 3 access only. Restricted. This fingerprint, Devin said slowly, was collected during a misconduct probe. The files from his last department. It was flagged and sealed. Someone embedded it so deep in the system, it doesn't even trigger alerts anymore. I had to break through a layered encrypt key just to see it. Shaq leaned back. So someone's hiding it. Not hiding, protecting. That flag means somebody high up doesn't want it reopened. This fingerprint shouldn't even be accessible, especially not to someone like me. If I didn't know how to ghost the firewall, I'd be locked out. Or flagged. Why flag a print unless it proves something damning? Shaq asked. Devon nodded. Exactly. You don't bury clean evidence. You bury guilt. They sat there for a moment. The truth between them now something solid, unignorable. Shaq exhaled. So someone in uniform sent that letter. Someone trying to scare us into silence. And now we've got the print. Partial, Devon reminded. This won't hold up in court alone. It needs context. It needs more. I'll get it, Shaq said, standing. Devon hesitated. You sure you want this fight? Shaq looked at him. Steady. I didn't pick this fight, but I'm the one they lit the fire under. Back home, Shaq tucked the copy of the match report into his desk drawer, double-locked. Then he gathered the letters and placed them in a fireproof safe, in the basement. Not out of fear, out of preparation. The lies had come to their door. Now it was time to return them, folded in truth. That night Shawnee lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling. Do you think this ends with justice? She asked. Shaq didn't answer right away. Then, I think it ends with light. Might not come clean. Might not come fast. But it's coming. Outside the wind shifted. The trees rustled. And the lies once hidden in envelopes now had fingerprints. And names. There's a different kind of silence that comes before a truth breaks open. Not fear, not hesitation, but wait. The kind of quiet that settles over people when they know something real is about to be said. That's the air that surrounded Big Shaq as he stepped onto the front lawn of the community center that used to be his barn. A simple podium stood in front of a long wooden bench. Reporters flanked the sidewalk. Neighbors lined up behind ropes. Some had brought lawn chairs. Some held hand-painted signs that read, "We stand with Shaq and truth doesn't burn." He didn't wear a suit, just a gray long-sleeve black jeans, and his father's watch scorched slightly at the edge from the fire still ticking. Shaq looked over the crowd and took a slow breath. I'm not here today to accuse anyone, he began, his voice deep and unwavering. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not naming names. I'm here because truth deserves a voice, even when power wants it quiet. Cameras clicked. Pencils scratched. He held up one of the letters. This was delivered to my home. No return address. No name. Just threats. Racist threats. And promises of more to come. He paused. We also found proof that someone with law enforcement ties was present near my barn the morning it burned. Someone who shouldn't have been there. No gasps. No screams. Just that stillness again. The kind that signals everyone knows exactly who he's talking about, even if he never says the name. I've given everything to this community, Shaq continued, scanning the faces. And I know this isn't about me. This is about the message. This is about what happens when you build peace on land that history wants to own. When you stand tall without permission. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. But his voice cracked just once when he said, I'm not scared, but I'm done being silent. That was the match. By the next morning, petitions were circulating online. One demanded a state-level review of the sheriff's department. Another called for the suspension of Deputy Colt Wexler pending a full investigation. Within 48 hours, a third petition had gone viral. This one pushed by a group of local high school students demanding transparency from the county. The media turned fast. News vans lined the curb. National correspondents began connecting the dots. Shaq's speech played on late-night news shows. Podcast panels debated the department's failure to protect. Footage of the burned barn played beside headlines like millionaire victimized in small-town arson, race and power in the crosshairs. Sheriff Harland Greaves held his own press briefing 2 days later. He looked rattled. Older, less sure of his voice. We are placing Deputy Colt Wexler on temporary leave, he announced flatly. This is not a punishment. It's a precaution, while we review ongoing allegations. Then he added, I believe this is a witch hunt. The man served his community with honor. But no one clapped. That night, while Shaq stood by the kitchen sink washing dishes, Lucille came to the window and said, There's someone waiting at the gate. She wasn't media. She wasn't press. She was just still. Late 30s, sharp eyes, coat too thin for the cool air. Her name was Kennedy Rhodes. I saw your press conference, she said as Shaq met her halfway up the path. And I need to show you something. They sat on the porch, no cameras, no lights, just wood creaking beneath their feet, and the weight of a new story settling in. My brother's name was Nolan, she said. He died in a fire. 6 years ago. Mobile, Alabama. Official cause accident. But it wasn't. Shaq leaned in, listening. Wexler was there. Different badge. Different city. But the pattern, same. Prior harassment. Anonymous notes. And the night before the fire, my brother had filed a formal complaint about racial intimidation during a traffic stop. She pulled a worn recorder from her bag. I didn't know I had this until months later. It was saved on his old hard drive. He'd captured part of a bar conversation. Wexler, drunk, talking to someone laughing about putting fear back where it belongs. I didn't know what it meant back then, but now. She clicked play. The audio was fuzzy, but the voice was clear enough. Male, confident, arrogant. You think I'm worried about please. I do what I do 'cause somebody has to keep these people reminded. Fire cleans the rot. Always have. Shaq sat perfectly still. That's Wexler, Kennedy said. No question. And I know they'll say it's not enough. I know they'll try to discredit me. But I couldn't hold on to this anymore. Not after what happened to your family. Shaq didn't speak. He just nodded once. Then stood and walked inside. He didn't sleep that night. He stayed up transcribing the audio, logging every second, printing it out line by line. He filed it alongside Devin Creed's fingerprint analysis, Reggie's timeline, Angela's dispatch log, and Boone's burn diagram. By dawn the binder was full. The story wasn't finished, but the next chapter had a voice. Now, the truth had come forward. And this time, it had witnesses. The sun barely touched the horizon when Shaq stepped out of his truck, gravel crunching beneath his boots, a quiet resolve carved across his face. Kennedy was already waiting by the bench under the cypress tree near the edge of the property. She held a small flash drive in her hand, her grip tight, like it might burn if she let go too soon. I copied the file 3 times, she said, handing it to him without ceremony. One for you, one for my lawyer, one buried somewhere no one can reach. Shaq took it gently, his eyes not on the drive, but on her. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. She nodded, but her jaw trembled before the words came. No, but I'm done being silent. The recording was damning. Not just careless words, not just locker room swagger. It was confession. Sick, proud, cruel. The voice of Colt Wexler, unmistakable, slurred and bold, chuckling in a dim bar over a whiskey glass. You can't teach some folks with tickets. You gotta remind them where the line is. Fire, now that stays with them. Smell it every time they wake up. That's how they learn who runs things. Shaq didn't need to edit. He didn't need to dramatize. The audio carried its own weight. But he also knew justice, in this era, required more than truth. It needed reach. So that night, from the quiet of his home office, Shaq opened his laptop and sent the file anonymously to one of the most listened to justice podcasts in the country. Voice of the Forgotten. The host, Callum Price, was known for pulling buried stories into daylight and tearing through systemic rote with surgical precision. Shaq wrote no letter, no explanation, just a subject line. Georgia. Fire. Listen. Then he logged off, closed his eyes, and waited. Within 24 hours, the podcast had aired the recording, raw, unfiltered, backed by context, Wexler's history, the accusations, the pattern of silencing complaints, and the burning of a $10 million farmhouse owned by one of the country's most beloved community figures. The nation exploded. Cable news anchors dissected every second of the tape. Hashtags surged, burned, not broken trended within hours. Shaq's name flooded timelines not for basketball, not for celebrity, but for standing up when everything around him had tried to sit him down. Editorials praised his grace. Activists called for immediate indictments. Politicians scrambled for comment, some condemning, others deflecting. It was no longer a local issue. It was national. Wexler's face was everywhere. Screenshots from news feeds, department IDs, blurry surveillance stills. His smile looked different now, framed by headlines that screamed fire and hate. Deputy under fire for racist arson link. Protesters flooded the county courthouse, not with signs of rage, but of remembrance. They carried printed photos of past victims, quotes from the recording, And Shaq's words from the press conference. Truth deserves a voice. But amid the chaos, one fact stood tall. Wexler was gone. No one knew when he slipped away. His badge was turned in. His house, vacated. The cruiser he'd driven was found in an impound lot 2 towns over. Wiped clean. No prints. No trace. Sheriff Harlan Greaves stood before cameras again. Eyes hollow. Lips dry. "We are cooperating with the investigation," he muttered. "We have no knowledge of Deputy Wexler's whereabouts." Shaq watched from home. Arms crossed. His expression unmoved. He didn't want fame. He didn't want pity. He wanted accountability. But now as Wexler vanished into shadows, that word felt like a moving target. Still, Shaq kept going. He met with federal investigators. Handed over everything. The letters, the prints, Devin Creed's report, Reggie's testimony, the dispatch logs, and Kennedy's confession. He didn't ask for protection. He didn't ask for deals. He asked for results. Meanwhile, Kennedy remained at Shaq's property under his family's care. Her courage fortified by their presence. She stayed silent during media storms, choosing peace over spectacle. But one evening, as the family gathered for dinner, she looked across the table and said softly, "My brother, he never got this far. He spoke up once and they silenced him. I feel like we're speaking for both of us now." Shaq nodded, passing her a bowl of cornbread. "Then we make it count." 1 week later, federal agents executed a quiet raid on the county records office. Servers were seized. Backup logs wiped clean. Investigations expanded beyond Wexler. Now the system that had covered for him, that had flagged his prints, that had rerouted complaints, that system was unraveling. Still, the man at the center of the storm, the one who'd bragged about fire and lessons, remained unseen. And yet, despite the chaos, Shaq stood taller, not because he won, but because he never folded. He'd faced down a silence so deep, it could have swallowed history, and he refused to step back. One evening, Lucille found him walking the rebuilt edge of the barn's foundation. The wood hadn't been laid yet, but the cement base was there, solid, patient. She joined him, arm linked through his. "You tired?" she asked. Shaq looked out across the field. "Yeah, but I ain't broken." "No," she said. "You're the reason they're shaking." And she was right. Justice hadn't arrived wrapped in handcuffs. But it was awake now, and it was listening. The sun had just begun to rise over the grove, casting long, slow shadows over the driveway as morning dew clung to every leaf like the land itself was trying to hold still. Shaq stepped outside like he did every morning, walking slowly, breathing deep, grounding himself in the place that had both burned and endured. The air was quiet, peaceful almost, but it didn't stay that way. There was something resting beneath the wiper blade of his truck. Folded neatly, no envelope, just a plain white sheet creased once through the center. He didn't touch it right away. He looked around, no footprints on the gravel, no engine sounds fading into the distance. Whoever left it had done so quietly, and well before dawn. He peeled the page from under the blade, and opened it. "You were supposed to burn too."
No name, no fingerprints.
Just that single, cold sentence. Typed, deliberate, void of humanity. A message not meant to provoke, but to promise. Shaq stood still. No panic. No fear. Just the heavy confirmation that this wasn't over. Wexler hadn't acted alone. Someone had opened a door. Maybe more than one person. And now that truth had seen daylight. The cowards were folding back into shadow, trying to leave warnings instead of answers. He walked inside and placed the note in the same fireproof box that now held the hate mail. The fingerprint match, the recording transcript, and Reggie's handwritten testimony. Every ugly truth sat sealed together, not hidden, but kept, so that no one could pretend this story had been made up, dramatized, or exaggerated. That morning, Sheriff Harlan Greaves resigned. The press release was brief. Irreconcilable breakdown in public trust. No apology, no admittance of negligence, just the formal retreat of a man who'd stood too close to corruption and stayed too silent for too long. His badge was turned in, and his record cleansed on paper was left behind like dust on a polished floor. Kennedy Rhodes, with newfound strength behind her, and public support in waves, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Mobile Police Department and the estate of Colt Wexler, even though the man himself had vanished. It wasn't about the money, it was about recognition, about putting her brother's name into a courtroom where someone finally had to say it out loud. Nolan Rhodes did not die by accident. The world kept spinning. The headlines cooled. The hashtags moved on. But on the land where fire once roared, something new began to rise. Shaq declined the medal. The city had planned a ceremony, invited officials, press, even lined up a custom plaque, engraved with his name and the words, "For bravery in the face of injustice." But when the invitation came, Shaq quietly folded it in half and slid it into a drawer. He didn't call anyone. He didn't send a statement. Later, when asked why he'd refused, he simply said, "I don't need medals. I need healing." And healing didn't come with flashbulbs or photo ops. It came with bricks. Lucille had insisted they build on the same land. Not for pride, for principle. "When they try to erase you, baby," she told him, "you don't move. You root deeper." So Shaq started laying the first bricks of a new structure. Not a replica of the farmhouse or the barn, but something different. Something with glass walls and a wide-open ceiling. A space for stories. A space for grief and growth to sit side by side. Mira helped draw the plans. Big, bold sketches with skylights and curved walls. Her vision blending strength with softness. "It shouldn't look like a house," she said. "It should look like something nobody can burn." They called it the Grove House, not for what had been lost, but for what had survived. Construction began with the help of neighbors. Volunteers arrived in boots and work gloves, many of them strangers, drawn by the quiet magnetism of a man who had faced down fire and still opened his gate. Shawnee oversaw every shipment. Lucille cooked meals for every worker, gospel humming from the porch like it always had. And Kennedy, though still tangled in legal proceedings and buried trauma, spent evenings sitting under the cypress tree, writing long letters to Nolan she never intended to send. Sometimes Shaq would join her. They wouldn't talk much. Just breathe. Just be. And in that stillness, healing made its home. The cost of truth had been high. They'd lost a home, a barn, a sense of safety that might never fully return. But in its place stood something earned, something reclaimed. They had forced a system to look at itself in the mirror. They had made silence tremble. One evening, after the roof had gone up and the walls were halfway finished, Shaq stood at the edge of the grove, watching the sunset stretch across the horizon, like an old soul waking up slow. He heard footsteps behind him. Reggie Four-Tooth Darnell emerged from the trees, hat pulled low, hands stuffed in his jacket. "I've been thinking," Reggie said. "Ain't never seen a house rise that fast. Not even when the storm took out the chapel back in '89. Shaq smiled. "It's not just a house." "I know," Reggie nodded. "It's a witness." And he was right. The Grove House wasn't built to be a shelter. It was built to testify. And it would. Long after the whispers stopped. Long after the fire's echo faded. It would still be standing. The land had healed, but it hadn't forgotten. Not the fire. Not the silence. Not the scar left behind. But time, when nurtured by purpose, knows how to bloom in spite of ruin. And on a morning streaked with orange sun and the sound of a school bus's air brakes, Big Shaq stood on that very same Georgia soil, watching something new unfold. The building behind him was clean and simple. 2 stories of stone and cedar, wrapped in vines planted by local kids. Glass framed the sky on both sides, making the roof feel open, like it was reaching out to the heavens, instead of just covering up pain. The plaque by the front door didn't bear Shaq's name. Instead it read, "There were no microphones, no ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just children laughing, teachers setting up easels on the lawn, and the smell of earth rising with the sun." Shaq stood still, hands behind his back, his frame calm but solid, like the trees that had watched it all, burned and survived. A yellow school bus hissed to a stop at the edge of the dirt path. A door folded open with a familiar clunk, and one by one, children began to spill out, backpacks slung low, eyes wide, shoes scuffing dust into memory. Their chatter wove into the morning like music that knew its rhythm. They weren't here to witness the past. They were here to create something new. In the open courtyard, just beneath the tallest oak still standing since the fire, Mamera stood with her sleeves rolled and a box of paints at her feet. She was older now, wiser in her walk, and bold in the way she smiled. Her students circled around her, waiting for instruction, and she gave them none. Just said, "Let the colors speak first, then your hands follow." And they did. Hands dipped into palettes, brushstrokes began to fly, and laughter echoed off the stone. Shaq watched her from a distance, the pride in his chest not loud, not boastful, just rooted. She had taken the ashes of something once stolen and turned it into language. She didn't need justice in courtrooms. She had found it in creation. A small group of elders sat nearby under canvas tents, men and women who'd watched the town shift, watched it resist, then soften, then rally. Lucille's chair stood empty, but her Bible sat on it, bookmarked with a pressed magnolia petal. Reggie's old canvas hat, weathered and patched, hung on a wall hook just inside the center's front door. Shaq stepped forward, not to address the crowd, but to speak over it. Not as a leader, but as a witness. His voice carried like the land had been waiting for it. "You can burn a house," he said slowly, "but not a man's soul." The breeze picked up, rustling leaves that never stopped listening. "You can silence a voice," he continued, "but not the truth. Truth's got memory, like a live root. You can cover it, step on it, set fire to the branches. But down there, below the surface, it's still growing. And when it finds the light again, it don't just come back, it comes back stronger." A hush settled in. Even the kids painting had slowed their hands, as if the wind itself paused to let his words finish. "And sometimes," he added, eyes narrowing slightly, "justice don't wear a badge." There was no applause, just stillness, a sacred quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't follow speeches but follows truth. Shaq turned his gaze back to the children. Maura was kneeling beside a boy who'd dropped his paintbrush, laughing gently, brushing dirt from his hands. Nearby, a young girl painted a bright red flame on a canvas, not destructive, not chaotic, but vibrant, controlled, alive. Then, in the corner of his vision, he saw him, at the far edge of the crowd, standing beside a rusted pickup truck, hat pulled low, face half hidden behind sunglasses. But Shaq didn't need a full look to know. Wexler, still free, still hiding behind shadows and distance, watching from the periphery like a ghost that never got exorcised. But Shaq didn't move, didn't tense. He turned slightly, enough to let Wexler know he'd been seen, but not enough to give him power. Because Wexler wasn't a storm anymore. He was just a man too small to stay present in the world he'd tried to burn down. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and then Shaq smiled. Not to provoke, to declare. Because fear didn't live here anymore. Not on this land. Not in this man. Not where truth had roots. And children now painted flames that meant warmth, not war. Wexler didn't approach. Didn't speak. Just stood there, as if the ground itself wouldn't let him step any closer. And when the crowd shifted, when Mara rose and called out to her father, Shaq turned and walked toward her. He didn't look back. Not because he was ignoring the past, but because he'd already beaten it. The roots had survived, and now they bloomed. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Ask the hard questions. Look beyond the headlines. Stand where truth stands, even when it's quiet. Because justice isn't a moment, it's a movement. And the next chapter? It starts with who's paying attention.